Hi, Brian Lloyd here, and these are my 10 of the best post-apocalyptic movies. We kick things off with 1975's A Boy and His Dog, starring a young Don Johnson as a wandering teenager in a desert wasteland in the aftermath of endless wars. While the video game series Fallout took huge inspiration from the movie's aesthetics, A Boy and His Dog is a bold and experimental movie. I mean, the dog is able to talk telepathically to Don Johnson, and that's not even the weirdest part of it. Next up is Logan's Run, made the next year in 1976. It's quite telling that the turbulent, crisis-ridden 70s gave birth to some of the most well-known post-apocalyptic movies in American cinema. Set inside a glittering city filled with beautiful people who never age past 30, Logan's Run may have been a commentary on youth's infatuation with youth, but it also spoke on how decadent societies block out the horrors around them by any means necessary. Some of the special effects are dated, but the ideas are just as relevant today.
This Is the End might be bending the rules somewhat, but it is technically post-apocalyptic, as it's set immediately after the rapture. But what makes it so interesting and so unique is how it places it not in some all-American family or even some kind of crack military protagonist, but rather utilising dumbass, self-centred celebrities just trying to survive. All the surprise cameos aside, this is an incredibly well-crafted, blackly funny comedy.
We come right up to 2018's A Quiet Place. For my money, the best post-apocalyptic movie of the past 10 years. It's telling that director and star John Krasinski repeatedly cited Jaws as his inspiration in A Quiet Place, not only in how about its gesturing towards the monster rather than showing it outright, but also in the idea of how placing the horror and the threat at a family unit's doorstep makes it that much more potent. In at number 6 is Wall-E. Although it might be hard to believe it, Wall-E manages to blend together post-apocalyptic sci-fi, a story about environmentalism, animation, and a romantic comedy, and it not only works, but is a devastatingly beautiful story. It's an exercise in using only what's needed to tell a story, and in doing so, reminds us how big ideas don't always need to be communicated using grand operatic ideas. 28 Days Later drops cinematic flourishes for down and dirty guerrilla-style filmmaking, and Danny Boyle's take on the zombie apocalypse in modern England hasn't lost any of its impact in the intervening years. If anything, living in our current pandemic and city streets devoid of people, it actually feels eerily familiar. Invasion of the Body Snatchers from 1978 is such a disturbing movie, not just in the very idea of human beings being replaced with generic, emotionless copies, but in how we're actually seeing the apocalypse take place during the movie, and it being over and done with about a third of the way through. There is absolutely no way any of the characters can stop it happen, but they're so desperately trying to save themselves from it that they don't yet realise it's all over until the horrifying final moment when Donald Sutherland turns to the camera, raises his finger and screams right down the lens at the audience. Mad Max Fury Road is not only the greatest action movie ever made, it's also carrying with it a fascinating examination of power dynamics in a post-apocalyptic society. Immortan Joe, played with gusto by the recently departed Hugh Keys-Byrne, imprisons women inside his fortress. Even though he's impotent, he can barely breathe and he only thinks of them as possessions. On top of that, you have also the idea of potential rebirth in the world being prevented because it suits those in power to keep the downtrodden further down. My number 2 choice is a movie from 1983 called The Day After. Now, while we may live in a world that has long since seen the end of the Cold War and the fear of nuclear apocalypse, it was a very, very real one in the 1980s. 2 of the movies of that era did as much as any demonstration or political movement to humanise that idea. One was a BBC TV movie called Threads, which was originally released in 1984 and hasn't been shown on TV for almost 20 years. The other was The Day After, which was originally a TV movie in the US, but it was released in cinemas in Ireland, the UK and around the world. The impact of The Day After was so widespread that it influenced then US President Ronald Reagan to re-evaluate his stance on nuclear weapons, not to mention being one of the few US movies shown on national television inside the Soviet Union. And finally, my number 1 choice is Children of Men from 2006. Children of Men is such a devastating story because it's not in how it shocks you at characters' deaths or how humanity is simply getting on with itself while it's slowly dying off. It's in how the entire atmosphere of the world it's set in just seems choked of hopelessness. All of the characters just seem to shuffle around, nobody's really interested in taking care of themselves, everyone looks tired and worn out, and you get the sense that all of them have just accepted their fate to some degree or another. Yet, in spite of all this, Children of Men is an examination of hope and faith in the face of unrelenting despair and damning futility. We're also faced with the question of whether or not humanity actually deserves a second chance. The birth sequence takes place in the middle of a war zone and only stops when she's walking out with the firstborn in nearly 2 decades. And everyone around them is stunned in silence as the child is walked through them just before a rocket attack kicks it all off again. So, there you have it. I need to go cheer myself up.